Well, hello, hello, wherever you are. It's Sarah Jane, and I'm just jumping in here today because I want to remind you what your animals are asking of you when it sort of comes to possibly needing to help them, assisted death, euthanasia, and a little bit around why grief needs rituals, why grief needs a voice. So the one thing that a lot of my animal clients really struggle with is the end of life, where perhaps their animals are no longer able to have quality of life, that their life force is being diminished, and you're feeling the pressure and the pain and the guilt of perhaps needing to put your animal down to actually help them to transition out of their bodies. And this is a really simple thing. It's not always easy, but I really want to encourage you when you find yourself in that difficult position, is to drop into your heart. Get out of your head, just drop into your heart and make that heart-to-heart connection with your beloved animal friend, and tell him what's going on. And if you've already decided that euthanasia, or perhaps you've had an animal communicator speak to your pet about what their wishes are in how they want to transition, if they need assistance in death, is let them know what's going to happen. Really walk them through step by step how you would like to be spoken to, how you would like to be made aware of what is going to happen leading up to the point where they actually leave their body. Really just let your dog or your cat or your bird or your horse know what the plan is, because animals are sentient beings, and they are in their own process of soul evolution. As much as they're growing us and helping us to be good humans and to realize that we are infinite beings having a human experience, they deserve to have some warning about what's happening so that they can prepare. And especially if you have other animals in the pack, in the matrix, the family dynamic, they also need to be included in what is going to happen so that they too can prepare to restructure the matrix when that animal leaves the pack, and also for them to be able to say their goodbyes and honor the one that is leaving. So if you do that, it's going to make this whole process a lot easier for you. I know it's easy, it's not necessarily simple, but it may give you a little bit more peace of mind that you're doing what's best for your animal. And I often speak to people who are going through a death or a loss or an imminent death or transition of a loved one, and they'll say things like, you know what, I'm doing really, really well. I'm holding it together. I'm trying to stay positive. I'm trying to stay strong. And I think that often that's code for I'm not going to let myself feel the emotions that I'm feeling, to be sad, to give grief a voice. I'm going to, hold my tears back and not really allow them to go into this beautiful process, which is part of life, in the death and the dying and the grieving process. And it's really understandable, that kind of response, because we live in a culture that doesn't support grief as a transition, as this beautiful gift where we can honor the life that we shared and celebrate the life of our loved one, by giving grief a sound. And we don't really we're certainly not taught the skills, and we certainly don't have the tools for how to be with grief, for how to actually allow ourselves to feel in order to heal. And, remember, healing is that process that sort of rescues us from this memory of trauma. And that in itself, going through that, when it's registering on our nervous system, oftentimes it brings up other unresolved experiences or stories that are still running on our pre-7-year-old mind, right, on our nervous system, that actually can re-traumatize us. So grief is going to look different for all of us. And it does have phases. If you've ever looked at any of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work, grief is a very important part of how we process and come to terms with these transitional periods, and not get stuck in grief as a place where we never ever feel like we're ever going to recover from it. So, I would just encourage you, if you're going through any kind of grief or loss at the moment, and remember, it can show up in not just in physical death of a loved one, but the grief of the loss of a dream, or a loss of a job, or a loss of a loved one that is still living. So, I want to just offer you a different model for what it might be for you. Instead of staying strong and trying to hold on, remember, the body holds on to unprocessed thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And eventually it's going to say no. Eventually it's going to come up and express itself in a different way. So, maybe strong is finding the strength, being able to ask for support and be willing to receive it, to help you to unpack what's really happening in your body, and to be present to those incredibly difficult emotions that are going to come up during your time of loss. And also to know, that when we do this, we build resilience. The body becomes more attuned to, on a very biochemistry level, right? Where the cells are communicating all of this, where the vagus nerve is giving us feedback of how we are moving through our environment of loss, of grief at that time, and being able to give yourself the space to integrate all of this and come out the other end wiser, stronger, more in deep appreciation of living your life to the best of your ability. Because if we give ourselves time to move into the grief and just let it flow through us, then we can be with grief, knowing that we're going to come out the other side. We'll never be the same, that's for sure, but grief grows us too. And then we can go into it and we can come out of it. This too is temporary. And then we can be with those waves of emotion that are going to come up and down in the most unlikely of situations, and not get locked back in to this freeze state, right? The state of inertia or hopelessness, whether that's learned or not, where we never get a chance to move it. It's really hard to find a healing path when we're frozen in time. And that's really what trauma is. It's that we're not being able to live in the present moment to create a future beyond grief or death, because we're living in the past, right? We're replaying that old tape on our subconscious over and over again, trying to find meaning in it, or trying to make sense of it. And, I'm really trying to start a little revolution here about what it means to do well, right? When somebody is dying, for example, and it might mean to let your grief flow. It might mean that you need to sit in the waiting room. It might mean that you need to be alone, not lonely. Everybody's grief is going to look different, and it might be, tears in a supermarket queue that just come up and smack you down. But it's really about finding your own way, your own process, through rituals, through appreciation, through dream state, to give grief a space. So just remember, grief is an energy. And because we have these mirror neurons, I was at the zoo yesterday visiting a very lonely, very sad, shut down elephant. And all of us that were there witnessing her grief that has been very prolonged. She's 39 years old, and she's had 39 years of waves of grief. And now she's alone. She doesn't have the support and the touch and the connection or the safety to be held in a place to really mourn all the losses that she's had in her life. So just, allow yourself, when you are in empathy, when your mirror neurons are feeling the pain of unprocessed grief in somebody else, that sometimes we don't need to say anything, we don't need to do anything, we just need to be able to hold that space, not only for the person going through the grief or the animal going through the grief, but for ourselves, where our cells, our own cellular memory is resonating our own unprocessed grief. And just allowing, for example, the tears to flow, to wail like our ancestors knew how to honor grief by giving it a noise. Because we've all had moments of trauma. We've all known that feeling of overcoming grief. And it can feel like you're your nervous system is being so flooded that we feel like we can't handle it, that we're going to drown in it. But there is a way that grief kind of recirculates when we're crying, when we're giving voice to our grief, or grieving, and we're not moving anywhere, or what I call sitting in the waiting room. It feels very visceral and very true in our bodies that we're just stuck in the eddying of the river. So just know, grief is designed to purify, to cleanse, to transmute, to uplift us, to move through us, and help us to really feel in order to heal, right? We have to move out of pain from the loss so that we can get clear and clean again. It's designed to heal our broken hearts. And in order to do this, though grief needs to move, not to be stuck, not to be frozen in time, and not to be so much all at once that it floods your nervous system. So just one way that you could perhaps sit with your own grief, or sit with the grief of somebody else that's going through a loss right now, or an impending loss, is to find a ritual, right, that can help you to contain your grief, to hold your grief. And that's not containing it like putting it in a little box and keeping it all locked up and never opening it again. You know, that's the Pandora's box where we just go back into re-traumatizing ourselves. But giving it a container, giving it space, like giving the banks to a river, right, to hold it so that it doesn't flood out and leak all over the place. It's not flooding, it's not inertia, it's not being frozen or stuck in our nervous system. It's moving at a pace that you can navigate, and only you know what the pace of your body requires. But rituals can really be a wonderful anchor in how we can create some structure to allow grief to flow. So it's not holding it so tightly and rigidly that nothing else is possible in that space, but it's being able to have flexible, soft, kind eyes, kind boundaries, to allow you to hone your skills, or to support somebody else in choosing how they are going to move through grief, so that it doesn't overwhelm you. So that's just a little bit of what I wanted to share with you today on grief, and giving yourself a holding space where you can really receive the gift on the other side of this. Just remember, it's part of the healing process, and it's not always easy to do this on your own. It's not always easy to see where you are at, or where perhaps you're holding yourself in that freeze state, in that space of unconsolable grief when you're in it, which is why, you know, going back to the basic wiring and our basic essential needs as an animal, soft animal-bodied human being, we all need safety in order to be able to connect to our own grief, and then come back to the sovereignty of the belonging to ourselves, and then moving through this powerful story of giving grief a sound, of giving yourself space to rewrite a new story that's really deeply anchored in celebrating life, celebrating your life, celebrating the life that you perhaps had with another. So I hope you found that helpful. If you have any comments or questions or insights about some of the rituals that perhaps you have used that have helped you move through this transitional period of loss, I'd love to hear what that is. Remember, we need a village to grow us, and we need a village to honor and witness grief in story, right? In talking through that, to gain the wisdom of those that have lived well and are now going to die well, because they've been given a space to leave their physical bodies and move into that oneness and consciousness in a different shape or form. And wherever you find yourself today, remember, if nobody told you, I love you, I see you, and I honor your path. I honor you where you're at right now. And the power of choice is always you. yours and yours alone. So use your choice. This is Tuesday Choice Day. And look at where perhaps you've been so deep in your grief that you haven't been able to allow yourself to receive the support, the connection, and the wisdom from others, whether they're living or dead. And I'll meet you there. All right, take care. Bye.